A lion cub clings to life after being saved from drowning by rescuers. The cub was sinking. His tiny golden head bobbed once, twice, then vanished under the violent churn of the swollen river. Rain hammered the earth like war drums. Lightning cleaved the sky in two. And on the muddy riverbank, a desperate scream tore through the storm. There. I saw something move right there. Samira, the lead rescuer of Wild Heart Foundation, didn't wait. She hurled her soaked jacket to the ground, eyes locked on the frothing current where a flash of tawny fur had disappeared. Her boots splashed through the rising floodwaters as she sprinted toward the edge, adrenaline drowning out every voice around her. Samira, stop. You'll get swept away. But Samira didn't stop. Because in that one flickering second just before the cub vanished, she'd locked eyes with him, and in that terrified, pleading gaze she'd seen a soul begging to live. The rescue mission had begun only hours earlier. Their team had been searching for a separated lioness and her cub after devastating flash floods swept through a protected wildlife zone in northern Kenya. Torrents of rain had torn through dry riverbeds, turning them into raging death traps. Entire herds had scattered in panic. And somewhere in that chaos, a mother had lost her baby. The local rangers had found the lioness 2 days ago, wounded, disoriented, and frantically searching the flood-ravaged savanna for her cub. But there had been no sign of the little one. Until now. Now, as Samira reached the edge of the embankment, she saw it again, a tiny trembling paw clawing at a jagged rock jutting from the current. The cub was still alive, but barely. His soaked fur clung to his frail body, and his eyes were wild with terror. He was stuck between life and death. The water surged higher, and the rock he clung to began to disappear beneath the waves. No, 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 hold on baby, I've got you. Samira screamed, sliding onto her stomach and reaching with all her strength toward the cub. The current nearly pulled her down with him. Mud and water roared around her. But she refused to let go. The cub cried out, a heartbreaking, rasping wail, and tried to lift his head. Then he slipped. Time slowed. Samira watched as the cub's body was yanked from the rock, the river swallowing him whole. Her hand grabbed at nothing but water. He was gone. And oh, she shrieked, throwing herself chest deep into the river without a second thought. Behind her, her team scrambled into motion. One man grabbed a rope. Another fumbled with a rescue pole. Their medic was already unzipping the trauma kit. But none of them could stop Samira, because only she had seen the look in that cub's eyes. Only she understood that this wasn't just an animal, it was a life that mattered. A life that wasn't ready to end. The current slammed her sideways, smashing her against a submerged boulder. Pain exploded through her ribs, but she fought on, pushing through the freezing current as if sheer will could part the water. And then, a flash of gold. There. Just beneath the surface, drifting like a leaf. The cub's body. His little legs no longer kicked. His eyes were closed. Samira lunged and caught him, her fingers clamping around his sodden scruff. She twisted, fighting the pull of the water, and kicked toward the shore. I've got him, she gasped. Help me. The rope snapped taut as the team hauled her back in, inch by inch, the river fighting them every second. One rescuer grabbed her arm. Another grabbed the cub. They tumbled onto the muddy shore in a heap, Samira sobbing, the cub limp in her arms. He wasn't breathing. No, please no, she whispered, cradling his tiny body to her chest. The medic dropped to his knees. Move, let me try CPR. The cub's lungs were filled with water. His mouth was open, tongue limp. His small ribs didn't move. He looked gone. But Samira refused to believe it. She pressed her forehead to his, whispering, Don't go. Don't go. You held on this long. Please, fight. The medic began chest compressions. Gentle but rapid. Then he tilted the cub's head, trying to breathe life into him. One breath. Nothing. Another. A third. Still nothing. The team fell silent. Rain still poured. Thunder still crashed. But in that moment all the world held its breath. Then, a cough. A sputter. A tiny choking wheeze. The lion cub jerked, and water gushed from his mouth. He coughed again. And again. Then he gasped. Yes. Samira cried, tears flooding down her face. Yes, yes, yes. The team erupted in cheers, but no one moved, no one dared break the spell. The cub was alive. Alive, but not safe. His breathing was ragged. His limbs trembled. His eyes were glazed with shock. We have to get him warm. Now, the medic said urgently. He's hypothermic. Samira wrapped him in her jacket, holding him close as the team rushed to the truck. The river had nearly claimed him. But this cub wasn't just a survivor. He was a fighter. As the vehicle bounced down the muddy trail, Samira looked down at the little creature curled in her arms. His head rested weakly against her, ears twitching. His whiskers quivered with each fragile breath. "You're okay," she whispered. "You're safe now." But even as she said the words, a gnawing dread crept into her heart. Because if the cub was here, drenched, alone, nearly dead, where was his mother? And what had separated them in the first place? They were about to find out. And the truth would be far more terrifying than anyone imagined. The cub whimpered weakly in Samira's arms as the truck skidded to a halt in front of the ranger station. The storm had slowed to a drizzle, but the sky remained bruised and heavy, as if the land itself hadn't finished mourning. Inside the cab, the team sat frozen, the crackling voice on the radio repeating its grim report. Fresh lion tracks at the flooded gorge. Blood. Drag marks. Samira's eyes flicked down to the sodden bundle in her lap. The cub was barely conscious, his breathing shallow, his tiny paws twitching against her arm. But it was his ears, one flattened and the other twitching toward the radio static, that broke her. He recognized the word lion. Somewhere deep in his trauma-drenched mind, he still remembered her, his mother. And maybe, just maybe, she was still out there. Bleeding. Alone. Dying. Samira didn't wait for a vote. "Gear up," she said, snapping into command mode. "We head to the gorge. Now." "But Samira, the cub needs warmth, IVs, he's not stable enough to move," the medic warned. "He can't stay here alone," she snapped. "We don't split them up again. Ever." She didn't say the rest aloud, but it thudded inside her skull like a drumbeat. "If we don't find his mother, he won't survive anyway." Within minutes, the truck roared down the muddy road, tires sliding through deep ruts and debris. The injured cub lay in a heated wrap beside Samira, his breath fogging against the soft wool. She never took her hand off him. Not once. "Eyes sharp," she said to the scout riding shotgun. "If something dragged the lioness, that means a predator. Possibly hyenas. Or worse." The man nodded, his hand tightening around the tranquilizer rifle beside him. They reached the gorge by dusk. The river here had clawed a deeper scar through the land, forming jagged cliffs and steep banks of loose stone. The ranger who'd sent the radio message was already there, crouched near a blood-smeared patch of mud. "She fought hard," he said, eyes scanning the terrain. "There are signs of a struggle. Big ones. And over there, look." He pointed to a shallow indentation in the ground, partially hidden under a tangle of brush. A den. A temporary one. Samira knelt beside it and found a tuft of fur clinging to a thorn branch. "Golden. Course. Lioness. She was hiding him here," she murmured. "She must have doubled back after the flood. Found him missing. Probably searched everywhere. And then," the scout asked, "she got ambushed." A sudden guttural growl ripped through the air. Everyone froze. Another growl. Closer this time. It didn't sound like a lion. "Hyenas." The scout swore. "They're not supposed to be this close to the reserve. The flood must have pushed them in." Samira rose to her feet, eyes hard. "We're not leaving without her." They tracked the blood trail as daylight faded, flashlights cutting thin beams through the gathering dark. The gorge narrowed, the walls closing in. Claw marks streaked the stones. Tufts of fur fluttered in the breeze. And then they heard it. A roar. But not a powerful one. Not the commanding thunder of a queen of the savannah. No, this was hoarse. Weak. Strained. It was a mother crying for her cub. Samira broke into a run. They found her wedged between two boulders, half hidden beneath a twisted root system, her golden body streaked with blood. One hind leg was torn open, the bone nearly visible. Deep gashes marked her shoulders. Her breath came in ragged pants and one eye was swollen shut. But when she saw them, she didn't run. She didn't even growl. She simply stared at Samira, and something ancient and knowing passed between them. An unspoken plea. "Where is my baby?" Samira didn't hesitate. She took the cub, still swaddled in the warm wrap, and gently laid him in front of the lioness. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then, slowly, the lioness lifted her head. She sniffed the air. And whimpered. She nudged him with her nose, carefully, reverently, as if he were a fragile miracle. The cub stirred weakly. His eyes fluttered open. And then, a sound none of them expected, a small, broken purr from deep in the lioness's chest. Samira's eyes stung. "She remembers," she whispered. "She knows him." The moment didn't last. The scout shouted, "Movement! We've got incoming, 6 o'clock. Hyenas. 4 of them, lean and hungry, slinking into the gorge like ghosts. Their eyes gleamed in the dark. Samira and her team jumped into defensive positions. The medic shielded the cub. The scout raised his tranquilizer rifle. Another ranger armed with a flare gun took aim. "Hold until I say," Samira barked. The lioness, sensing danger, tried to rise, but collapsed with a guttural cry. She couldn't protect her baby. Not this time. Was up to them. The lead hyena charged, snarling. "Now!" Samira shouted. The flare lit the night in a sudden burst of red fire. The hyenas yelped, scattering in the confusion. One was hit with a tranquilizer dart and dropped like a stone. The others circled warily, testing the perimeter. Samira knew they'd come back. They were cowards, but clever. "We've got maybe 15 minutes before they regroup," the scout warned. "Not enough time to treat her leg here," the medic said. "We'll need to sedate and lift her into the truck." "Can she survive that?" Samira asked. "Honestly? No idea. She's lost a lot of blood." Samira looked between the lioness and the cub. One injured. One barely breathing. Both on the brink of death. They couldn't carry them both at once. "Unless we lift them together," she said suddenly. "Strap them side by side. Let him feel her warmth. Let her know he's safe. It might be the only thing keeping them alive." The medic hesitated. "If she wakes mid-lift." "She won't," Samira said. "She won't risk hurting him. She remembers." The team worked with urgent precision, sedating the lioness just enough to move her, then gently placing her and the cub onto the lift stretcher. Even in her sedated state, the lioness shifted toward him, her body curling protectively around his tiny form. As they lifted them into the truck, a chorus of hyena howls echoed behind them, angry, vengeful. But they were too late. The rescuers had won this round. As the vehicle roared away from the gorge, Samira sat beside the pair, eyes never leaving them. "They're not out of the woods yet," the medic warned. "That leg's infected. The cub's lungs are weak. The next 24 hours will decide everything." Samira nodded. She knew. This fight was far from over. But for the first time since the storm began, there was hope. She looked down at the lioness and her cub, reunited against all odds. The cub opened one eye. The lioness purred again. Samira smiled, a tear slipping down her cheek. "You just hold on a little longer," she whispered. "Both of you." The cub's body was convulsing. The beeping machine spiked into a shrill scream of alarm, slicing through the sterile quiet of the wildlife rescue ICU like a blade. "Respiratory arrest." "He's coding," the vet shouted, already pressing the oxygen mask tight to the cub's snout as a nurse rushed in with the emergency cart. Samira stood frozen just outside the glass partition, fists clenched so tightly her nails cut into her palms. Her eyes were locked on the tiny golden body twitching on the padded table, lifeless except for the chaotic spasms racking his frame. A tangle of wires and tubes ran into him, pumping fluids, medicine, hope. He wasn't supposed to crash. Not now. Not after everything. The vet's voice was tight, rapid fire. Heart rates dropping, oxygen saturation at 37. He's going into full hypoxia. Prep adrenaline. "No," Samira whispered, then louder, "No. Not now." The cub's tiny paw twitched, and then stilled. A flat line. "No pulse," the nurse said, eyes wide. The vet didn't hesitate. Commencing CPR. It was surreal watching a grown man perform chest compressions on something so fragile, so small. His thumbs pressed rhythmically against the cub's rib cage while the nurse squeezed oxygen into his lungs, count for count. 1, 2, 3, breathe. 1, 2, 3. Samira slammed a hand against the glass. "Come on, baby. Breathe. Come on." Nothing. Time melted. 30 seconds. A minute. 90 seconds. The vet's voice was hoarse now. Still flat. The nurse looked at the clock. We're at 2 minutes. Too long. Even if they got him back, the damage could be permanent. Samira couldn't take it. She yanked the door open and burst into the room. "Samira," the nurse gasped. "I don't care," she snapped. "Move." She pushed between them, knelt beside the table, and placed her hand on the cub's chest, right over his heart. "I know you're tired," she whispered, voice cracking. "I know everything hurts. But your mama's right down the hall. She's alive. She waited for you." Her tears dropped onto his fur. "You made it through a flood. Through hyenas. Through hell. Don't stop now. Please, stay with me." A beat of silence. And then, a twitch. The monitor blipped. Once. Twice. Beep. 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 "Pulse is returning," the vet shouted. We've got him back. Samira let out a ragged breath, collapsing into the chair as the team rushed back in, stabilizing him. Keep oxygen flowing. He's not out of danger, but he's responding, the vet said, glancing at Samira. Whatever you just did, don't stop. She didn't move. Just kept her hand on his chest, whispering, "Good boy. You're so brave. She's going to be so proud." 4 hours later, in the recovery ward, the cub lay nestled in a heated cradle, IVs in both legs, his breathing slow but steady. Samira sat beside him, her hand never leaving his fur. The lioness lay in the adjacent enclosure, her head resting on a pile of clean straw, legs stitched and bandaged, but her eyes were alert now. Searching. Samira rose slowly and opened the gate between their pens. The staff had warned her, it was too soon, too risky. But she knew in her gut, it was exactly the right time. She lifted the cub, so gently, so carefully, and carried him toward the lioness. As she approached, the lioness raised her head. Her body trembled, but her eyes locked on Samira's with fierce intent. Samira knelt. "I brought him back to you." She laid the cub down just inches from the lioness's paws. And waited. Seconds passed. Then the lioness shifted, groaning softly as she reached out a paw, touching the cub's side. Her tongue rasped across his tiny face, cleaning him, waking him. The cub stirred. His nose twitched. And then he gave a weak, mewling cry. The lioness answered with a rumbling purr that filled the room. The cub dragged himself forward and curled into the warm crook of her chest. It was done. They were home. But the reunion came with a terrible price. The lioness's infection was spreading, fast. The vet confirmed the wound had gone septic, likely due to contaminated floodwater and hyena bites. If they didn't intervene again, she'd be gone within 48 hours. "We need surgery," the vet said grimly. "Aggressive debridement. But the anesthesia is risky. If she dies under, the cub won't survive the grief." Samira stared at the x-rays, feeling the weight of an impossible decision. "Then I'll stay with her," she said. "Through the whole thing. You can't be in the OR. I'll stay in her sight line. If she thinks we're trying to hurt her, she'll panic. But if she sees me, if she remembers I brought her baby back, she might let us help." The vet hesitated. "It's a long shot." Samira nodded. "But it's the only one we've got." Surgery day. The lioness was led to the operating pen, gingerly, her cub watching through a small viewing window. The moment she began to panic at the lights and noise, Samira stepped into her view. "Hey," she said softly, her palms raised. The lioness froze. And then exhaled. She laid down. And didn't resist. The surgery took 2 hours. They cut away the necrotic flesh, flushed the infection and stabilized her vitals. 3 times her pulse dipped. Twice they nearly lost her. But she made it. As they rolled her into recovery, still groggy, Samira ran to the cub's pen. He was pacing now, tiny legs wobbling, eyes frantic. "Hey baby," she said, kneeling. He rushed to the bars, rubbing his head against her hand. "Your mama's okay," she whispered. "She made it." He mewed, high and thin but joyful. Samira opened the partition once more, and this time he didn't wait. He darted into her enclosure and buried himself beneath her chin, purring so loudly even the vet stopped in the doorway, stunned. "That's beautiful," he whispered. Samira sat beside them, her heart full and aching. "Yeah," she said. "It really is." But just when everything seemed safe, one last blow fell. That evening, after the rescue center had quieted, Samira returned to the enclosure to check on them. What she found stopped her cold. The cub was lethargic. Too still. His breathing, though steady, had slowed again. A low rattle filled his chest. "No," she whispered, rushing to him. The vet came running. "He's crashing again, secondary infection. Possibly pneumonia. But we've been treating him." Samira cried. "Some bacteria resist the first round of antibiotics. We'll need to escalate. Intravenous only. Round the clock." He frowned. "And there's one more issue." "What?" He hesitated. "We have to separate them. The cub's condition is contagious. If she gets sick again with her weakened immune system, she won't survive it." Samira's heart dropped like a stone. "Separate them again? After everything?" "No," she whispered. "Please. There has to be another way." But there wasn't. The staff moved in, slowly, carefully, to lift the cub away again. The lioness woke instantly. She saw them. She saw her cub in the vet's arms. And she roared. A sound of such primal heartbreak that it shook the walls. The cub tried to cry, but no sound came out, only a tiny wheeze. His paw reached weakly toward her. Samira couldn't breathe. The door slammed shut. The vet cradled him close, rushing to the quarantine room, already prepping meds. Samira stood frozen, caught between two enclosures and two broken hearts. She had no idea if either would survive the night. But she knew one thing. They wouldn't stop fighting. Neither of them. At midnight, the cub's oxygen levels dropped again. The machine screamed. The vet called for Samira, desperate. She ran to the glass. "Talk to him," he shouted. "He's fading." She pressed her hands to the glass, eyes wide, voice breaking. "Baby, listen to me. One more fight. Just one more. She's waiting for you. Don't give up now, she needs you." His tiny eyes fluttered. A breath. One more. The oxygen machine hissed rhythmically, casting a faint glow across the cub's tiny, fragile chest as it slowly rose and fell. Samira stood frozen outside the quarantine enclosure, eyes wide, hand pressed flat against the glass. Inside, the cub's vitals had stabilized, barely. He was alive. But for how long? Respiration's weak, but he's still fighting, the vet said, eyes darting between screens. This is the critical window. If he makes it through the next 6 hours, he's got a chance. Samira barely nodded. Her gaze never left the cub. Every breath he took sounded like it came from deep underwater, thick, bubbling, painful. His little limbs twitched every so often, like his dreams still held the memory of running beside his mother. But in this moment, he was alone again. And she knew he could feel it. "He needs to hear her," Samira said suddenly. The vet blinked. "What?" "He can't see her. He can't smell her. But maybe he can hear her. Maybe that'll help him hold on." An hour later, Samira stood by the lioness's recovery pen with a small recording device. The lioness had been restless since the cub had been taken again, refusing food, pacing the edge of her enclosure, her eyes fixed on the door that never opened. Samira knelt down slowly, holding the device out. The lioness regarded it for a long moment. Then, as if understanding the plea behind Samira's trembling hands, she lifted her head and let out a deep, guttural sound. Not a roar. Not quite a growl. It was something gentler. Something ancient. A lioness's call to her cub. Back in the quarantine chamber, the lights were dim. The machines beeped softly, keeping time with the rhythm of survival. Samira stepped inside, mask and gown tight against her skin, cradling the speaker close to her chest. She knelt beside the cub and hit play. The lioness's soft calls echoed through the room. The cub stirred. His ears twitched. His mouth opened, not for a cry but as if trying to answer. Samira reached out and rested her hand gently against his side. "That's your mama?" she whispered. "She hasn't given up on you. So don't you give up on her." His tiny paw curled against her fingers. The machines beeped again, faster, steadier, stronger. Tears flooded Samira's eyes. For the first time in days, she truly believed he might survive. 4 days later, the cub took his first steps on his own. It wasn't graceful. It wasn't easy. But he did it. He stumbled. He swayed. And then he toddled straight toward the reinforced glass wall separating him from the lioness's enclosure, and pressed his face against it. On the other side, the lioness pressed her nose right back. The team cheered. The vet wiped his eyes and muttered something about dust in the room. Even the director, a stern man who'd seen a lifetime of rescues, just stood there and whispered, "That's a miracle." Another week passed. The infection was gone. The pneumonia had cleared. And both mother and cub were deemed strong enough for a supervised reunion. This time there were no IVs, no restraints, no monitors screaming warnings. Just the two of them. In the soft, early morning light, Samira unlocked the sliding gate between their pens and stepped back. The lioness didn't rush. She waited. She looked. And then the cub, now walking stronger, tail swishing with curiosity, padded forward. 1 step. 2. Then he broke into a clumsy, bounding sprint, straight into her chest. She caught him in her massive forelegs, curling around him, licking him frantically. He let out a happy, high-pitched cry, burying himself into her warmth like it was the only place he'd ever belonged. And in a way, it was. Samira stepped back, heart full, as the rest of the staff watched silently. No one spoke, because some moments are too sacred for words. 2 months later, Samira stood on the edge of the rehabilitation compound, a clipboard in one hand, the other shielding her eyes from the sun. Across the wide, grassy field, the lioness and her cub moved in unison, strong, healthy, and wild again. He was bigger now, stronger. His coat gleamed gold in the sunlight, and his playful roars echoed across the enclosure as he pounced through the tall grass. But it was the lioness who took Samira's breath away. She was majestic, fully healed. Her stride was long and purposeful again. Every muscle coiled with power and grace. The trauma of the flood and hyena attack was behind them. Now they were preparing for the wild. In just a few more weeks, both would be relocated to a protected wildlife reserve, far from poachers, far from danger. A place where the cub could grow, learn to hunt, lead a pride of his own one day. Samira swallowed the lump in her throat. It was everything they had fought for. And yet, she already missed them. That evening, she visited their enclosure one last time before the transfer. The cub trotted over the moment he saw her, his familiar chirp echoing softly. He rubbed his head against the fence. Samira laughed, crouching down to press her palm to the mesh. "You remember me?" she whispered. "I knew you would." The lioness stood back, watching. Then, with a quiet huff, she walked over and sat beside her cub, calm, regal, her eyes locked onto Samira's. "Was a thank you. And a goodbye." Samira nodded. "You're free now," she said softly. "Both of you." The next morning, before sunrise, the transport gates opened. The lioness was first, stepping calmly into the transport crate with a confidence born of survival. The cub followed close behind, glancing over his shoulder just once before curling beside her inside the crate. The doors closed gently. The team stood in silence as the truck rolled forward, turning onto the road that led to the reserve. Samira didn't cry. Not this time. Because this wasn't the end. It was their beginning. Samira sat cross-legged in the reserve's observation blind, binoculars pressed to her face. She scanned the savannah, breath held, heart pounding. And then, there they were. The lioness, perched proudly atop a low rock, eyes scanning the horizon. And beside her, the cub. Taller now. Muscular. No longer the frail scrap of fur pulled from muddy water all those months ago. He stood alert, tail flicking, watching a group of antelope in the distance. Learning. Preparing. Becoming what he was born to be. A lion. Samira lowered the binoculars and smiled through her tears. They had made it. If this story moved you even for a moment, please do one thing. Share this story with someone who believes every life matters. Comment below, what would you have done in Samira's place? And most of all, subscribe to Lion's Shield for more real stories of courage, love, and second chances. Every view, every share, every subscription helps save the next life. You can be their voice. Because hope begins with a heartbeat and a hand willing to reach into the flood.